When corporate lawyer Rebecca Chen is publicly humiliated by her father at a family dinner for wasting her expensive education on legal aid work, she discovers something that changes everything. Evidence of his investment firm's massive fraud scheme, hidden in documents he carelessly left in her childhood bedroom. As her family continues to mock her career choices, Rebecca must decide whether to destroy the man who raised her or let his crimes destroy countless innocent victims. Subscribe to our channel for real stories of betrayal, justice, and the impossible choices that define us. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across my mother's Wedgwood china, as my father's voice cut through the polite dinner conversation like a blade through silk. Rebecca still insists on playing poverty lawyer, he announced to the table of his business associates and their perfectly coiffed wives. Yale Law School, top of her class. And she chooses to defend criminals who can't even afford to pay her. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. 28 years old, and I still felt like that little girl desperate for his approval, the one who'd memorized corporate tax codes at 12 just to impress him during his business calls. It's called public defense, Dad, I said quietly, keeping my voice level. Constitutional right to counsel. Sixth Amendment. He laughed. That particular laugh he reserved for things he found beneath his attention. Constitutional rights don't pay for penthouses in Manhattan, sweetheart. Your sister understands that. Across the table, my younger sister Morgan smiled into her wine glass. At 25, she'd joined Dad's investment firm straight out of business school, and he never let me forget it was the right choice. How much did you make last year, Rebecca? Dad continued, and I could feel the other dinner guests shifting uncomfortably. 45,000? 50? I pay my personal assistant more than that. Harold? Maybe we should... My mother started, but he waved her off. No, Diane. She needs to hear this. I didn't pay $200,000 for her education so she could waste it on people who contribute nothing to society. Something inside me cracked. Not broke. I'd been breaking slowly for years, but cracked wide enough that light finally got in. The people I defend are presumed innocent, I said, setting down my fork with deliberate care. Unlike your clients, who are presumed rich enough to buy their way out of anything. His face darkened. You want to compare our work? Fine. I've built a firm that manages $8 billion in assets. I've created jobs, generated wealth, contributed to the economy. What have you contributed? How many guilty criminals have you helped walk free? I've helped ensure that everyone, regardless of their bank account, gets a fair trial. That's what the law is supposed to be. The law, he said dismissively, is a tool, and you're using it like a child playing with her father's power drill. The guests laughed politely. Morgan smirked. Mom looked at her plate. I stood up slowly, my napkin falling to the floor. Excuse me, I said. I seem to have lost my appetite. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, because sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who should protect us. I retreated to my childhood bedroom, the one Mom insisted on keeping exactly as I'd left it, as if I might one day abandon my phase and come home. The pale blue walls were covered with debate team trophies and mock trial certificates, evidence of a girl who'd believed that excellence would eventually earn her father's respect. I sat on the bed, pulling out my phone to text my best friend Aisha about the disaster downstairs, when I noticed something odd. My father's leather briefcase was leaning against my old desk. He must have put it there when he'd arrived early and helped himself to his usual pre-dinner scotch in my mother's sitting room. The bedroom shared a wall with it. He probably didn't even think twice about leaving his things in here. The briefcase was slightly open. I should have ignored it. Should have just gone back downstairs, endured the rest of dinner, driven back to my studio apartment in Brooklyn, and continued my life of disappointment and dismissal. But something made me walk over to it. Inside were the usual items: his tablet, a legal pad, some client files. But there was also a folder marked Horizon Confidential, Internal Only. Horizon Capital was my father's investment firm, the one he'd built from nothing into a Wall Street powerhouse, the one Morgan now worked for, the one that funded the Greenwich mansion we were sitting in, the European vacations, the country club memberships. I opened the folder. At first, the documents didn't make sense. Columns of numbers, account transfers, offshore holdings. But I'd spent 3 years in law school studying securities fraud, and another year as a junior associate at a corporate firm before I'd burned out and switched to public defense. I knew what I was looking at. My father wasn't just managing investments. He was running a Ponzi scheme. The evidence was all there. Phantom returns paid to early investors using money from new investors, falsified account statements, shell companies in the Cayman Islands, forged audit reports. The fraud went back at least 5 years, possibly longer. $8 billion in supposed assets. Maybe half of that was real. The rest was smoke, mirrors, and lies that would eventually collapse and destroy thousands of people's retirement savings. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and started photographing every page. I was halfway through the folder when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I shoved the documents back into the briefcase and dove onto my bed, grabbing my phone and pretending to scroll through Instagram just as my mother opened the door. "Rebecca, honey, dessert is being served. Your father wants you to come back down. Tell him I have a headache," I said, which wasn't even a lie. My head was pounding with the weight of what I'd just discovered. She sighed. "He's only hard on you because he cares. He wants you to reach your potential." "No, Mom. He's hard on me because I didn't become the daughter he wanted." After she left, I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of dinner conversation and laughter drifting up from below. My father had humiliated me. Again, he dismissed my career, my choices, my entire life as worthless. And all the while, he'd been committing fraud on a scale that would destroy families, wipe out life savings, and send people into bankruptcy. The question wasn't whether to report him. That part was simple. I'd taken an oath as an attorney. I had an ethical obligation. The question was whether I could survive the aftermath. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went to a coffee shop in Park Slope, far from my office and even further from my father's world. I ordered a triple espresso and opened my laptop. The photos I'd taken were damning. I spent 3 hours cross-referencing them with public SEC filings, investor reports, and financial news. Every cross-check confirmed what I'd suspected. Horizon Capital was a house of cards, and my father was the architect. I thought about the dinner guests from last night. Wealthy people, certainly, but not all of them obscenely rich. Mr. Henderson, who'd invested his entire pension with my father. Mrs. Yamamoto, who'd trusted him with her late husband's life insurance payout. These weren't billionaires playing with money they could afford to lose. These were people who believed in Harold Chen's golden touch. My phone buzzed. A text from Morgan. "Dad says you embarrassed him last night. Very mature, Becca." I stared at the message, then at the evidence on my laptop screen. Morgan worked for Horizon. She had to know. Or did she? She'd only been there for 3 years, and Dad kept her in the wealth management division, far from the real operations. It was possible she was as much a victim as the clients. Or maybe she knew exactly what was happening and chose to look the other way because the money was too good. Another text, this time from my mother. "Your father has decided to reduce your trust fund distribution this year. Perhaps financial pressure will help you reconsider your career choices." I laughed out loud, startling the barista. The trust fund my grandmother had left me, the one my father controlled until I turned 35, was barely enough to cover my student loan payments. He'd been reducing it for years, punishing me for every choice he disapproved of. Now he wanted to use it as leverage to force me back into corporate law, back into his world, back into being the daughter he could be proud of. He had no idea I was holding the evidence that could put him in federal prison for the rest of his life. I opened a new email and typed, "To whom it may concern at the Securities and Exchange Commission." Then I stopped. What if I told my father first? Gave him a chance to make this right, to unwind the fraud, to somehow fix this before it destroyed everything? But I knew him. He wouldn't fix it. He'd deny it, attack me, and probably find a way to make the evidence disappear along with any chance of justice for his victims. And here's what you need to understand about moments like this. There is no perfect choice. There's only the choice you can live with. I thought about the clients I defended, people who'd made terrible decisions, who'd hurt others, who deserved accountability. I fought to make sure they got fair trials, proper representation, justice as the law defined it. How could I demand justice for strangers, but grant immunity to my own father? I finished the email to the SEC, attached the photos, and included a detailed summary of what I'd found. Then I copied it to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute. Then I pressed it. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within a week, federal agents raided Horizon Capital's offices. Within 2 weeks, my father was indicted on 47 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The family dinner that followed his arraignment was different from the last one I'd attended. Morgan was crying, her perfect makeup streaked across her face. How could you do this to us? To Dad? To the family? I didn't do anything to the family, I said quietly. Dad did this. He committed the crimes. You turned him in, she screamed. Your own father. I reported a crime I had knowledge of. It's called being an attorney. It's called having ethics. My mother sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. You've destroyed everything, she said, her voice hollow. The house, our reputation, our entire life. No, Mom, Dad destroyed it. I just refused to help him keep destroying other people's lives too. My father had been released on a $10 million bond. Money he'd somehow hidden from the feds, probably in one of those offshore accounts. He sat at the head of the table, and for the first time in my life he looked old. I want you to know, he said, his voice trembling with rage, that you are no longer my daughter. As far as I'm concerned, you died the day you betrayed this family. The words should have hurt. Years ago, they would have devastated me. But I'd spent the past 2 weeks fielding calls from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from victims who wanted to thank me, from other whistleblowers who'd found the courage to come forward because I had. That's fine, Dad, I said, because the daughter you wanted never really existed anyway. The trial took 8 months. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every document, every fraudulent transfer, every lie my father had told to keep the scheme alive. Morgan was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. It turned out she hadn't known. Not at first. But when she'd started to suspect something was wrong and asked questions, Dad had promoted her, given her a raise, and made her complicit through willful blindness. She didn't speak to me throughout the trial. My mother attended every day, sitting behind my father, her face a mask of dignified suffering. She never once looked at me. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced my father to 23 years in federal prison. At 65, it was essentially a life sentence. As the marshals led him away, he looked directly at me for the first time since the trial began. I hope you're proud of yourself, he said. And here's the thing, I was. Not proud of destroying my family, not proud of sending my father to prison, but proud of choosing justice over loyalty, truth over comfort, doing what was right even when it cost me everything. The restitution process is still ongoing. The victims will get some of their money back, though not all of it. Mr. Henderson's pension is partially restored. Mrs. Yamamoto will be able to keep her house. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something. I still work as a public defender. I still make $47,000 a year. I still live in a studio apartment in Brooklyn that's smaller than my parents' garage used to be. But I sleep at night. Morgan eventually reached out 6 months after the sentencing. We met for coffee in a neutral location. She apologized. Not for Dad's crimes, but for her part in enabling them, for choosing money over questions, for not being brave enough to look when she suspected something was wrong. We're working on rebuilding our relationship. It's slow, painful, and incomplete. Some things, once broken, never quite fit back together the same way. My mother hasn't spoken to me since the verdict. I heard she sold the Greenwich house and moved to Florida to be near her sister. The trust fund she'd threatened to reduce? Turned out it was funded with fraudulent money. It doesn't exist anymore. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I wish I'd never opened that briefcase, never sent that email, never chosen prosecution over family. The answer is no. Because here's what I learned. Family isn't supposed to be a shield for crime. Love isn't supposed to mean protecting people from the consequences of their choices, and loyalty that requires you to abandon your principles isn't loyalty at all. It's just another form of control. My father thought he was teaching me a lesson at that dinner when he humiliated me in front of his friends. He thought he was showing me the cost of choosing ideals over pragmatism, justice over wealth, principle over power. He was right about one thing: there was a cost. But he was wrong about who would pay it. If you've ever faced an impossible choice between family and doing what's right, leave a comment and share your story. Like and subscribe for more real stories about courage, consequences, and the price of justice. Because sometimes the people we're supposed to trust most are the ones who need to be held accountable. I'm Rebecca Chen, and this is what happened when I chose truth over family and discovered that some things, integrity, justice, the ability to look at yourself in the mirror, are worth more than any inheritance, any trust fund, any father's approval. The cost was everything I thought I wanted. The gain was everything I actually needed. And I would make the same choice again.